the Montana Television Network, in partnership with Montana PBS. This is Campaign 2014, the House Debate. Made possible thanks to support from the Greater Montana Foundation. The Greater Montana Foundation, founded by Montana broadcasting pioneer Ed Craney, supports communications on issues, trends, and values of importance to all Montanans.
Debate night here on the Montana Television Network. We thank you for tuning in tonight. I'm Jay Cohn. I'll be moderating tonight's debate as we look at the U.S. House race here in Montana between Republican Ryan ZINKE and Democrat John Lewis. This is a big week for this campaign. These two candidates met in a radio debate earlier this week in Billings, but tonight is the only televised face-to-face debate between the two candidates, at least that we know of at this speaking. We'd like to welcome our audience tonight statewide on the Montana Television Network stations. We're also coming to you statewide on Montana PBS stations across the state of Montana. And we're also going nationwide tonight on C-SPAN. So wherever our viewers are tuning in, we welcome you to Montana's U.S. House debate. Just a few ground rules to go over. We'll have no opening statements tonight. The candidates will be answering questions from our panelists. We'll be giving 60 seconds for those answers, and each candidate will then have a 30-second rebuttal. They'll have 2 minutes for a closing statement. They will be taking a 1-minute break midway through. Some quick ground rules for our audience. We're here from the Riverside Country Club in Bozeman with a small group of campaign friends, family on both sides of the aisle here. We're asking everyone to hold their applause to the very end. We're all adults, and we're not going to answer our cell phones during this debate as well. Let's do our first introduction, first of all, for Republican nominee Ryan ZINKE. Ryan, nice to see you here. Ryan is a third-generation Montanan. He is a standout athlete at Whitefish High School. He was a standout in several sports. He went to the University of Oregon on an athletic scholarship, earning a degree in geology, a Bachelor of Science degree. He's had a 23-year career with the military in the U.S. Navy, 2 stints with the Navy SEALs. In 2008, he was elected to the Montana State Senate, where he chaired the Senate Education Committee, and just a couple of years ago, he ran for lieutenant governor. He is also the CEO of a consulting firm that specializes in advanced technology for aerospace and oil and gas. He and his wife, Lolita, have 3 children. Ryan, welcome tonight.
Great to be here.
Now we welcome Democratic nominee John Lewis. John is a 4th-generation Montanan. He and his wife, Melissa, have 2 children, Kate and Jackson. John Lewis was born in Billings, a Magic City boy, but he was raised in both Billings and Missoula. Most recently, he served as state director for Senator Max Baucus, a position he held for 4 years, supervising a staff of 20. He's a graduate of Western Washington University with a degree in political science and communications. And he touts his top legislative accomplishments as tackling veterans' unemployment issues and also helping many Montana communities wade through the bureaucratic red tape for flood disaster following the 2011 floods in Montana. John Lewis, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you, Jay.
And it's my pleasure to introduce you now to our panel, who will be asking our candidate questions. First, we welcome Donna Kelly, right in the middle of our, on this end of our panel questioning. Donna is from KBZK Television. She's been with the Bozeman station now for 8 years. Donna also worked prior to that for many years with CNN in Atlanta, and she wanted me to tell you that she also had several overtures to work for Fox as well during those years. I can tell you that Donna and I started our television careers together, let's just say many decades ago, at a small television station in Helena, Montana. Donna, good to see you tonight. Jill Valley is sitting in the middle of our panel tonight. Jill is from KPAX-TV. She's been anchoring the news there for 22 years. She is a 6-time Montana Broadcaster of the Year. Jill, good to see you tonight. Last, certainly not least, is my co-anchor at KTVQ Television in Billings. Please welcome Janelle Slade. She is a 2-time Montana Broadcaster of the Year. She went straight from college to Q2, spent a few years on the dark side in communications and public relations, but we welcomed her back to Q2 a couple of years ago. So that is our panel tonight. But I get the first question, and let's get going because we just have 1 hour to get through this. I'm sorry that took as long as it did. John Lewis, we flipped coins, and you get the first question tonight, at least answering it, and it comes from me. As we speak, Congress has an 8% approval rating. The calling card of Congress is partisan gridlock. This is a do-nothing Congress on steroids, this past Congress. So my question is, why in the world do you want to join this esteemed group? And what can you do, what do you bring to the table to change this culture in Washington that has our country stuck on hold?
Sure. Thank you very much, Jay. I want to thank Montana news stations for hosting this debate, and welcome Donna and Jill and Janelle for being panelists. When I first got in this race, I gave a speech, one of the earliest events I did, and I talked about my past experiences and things I learned while working on legislation for trying to help veterans and other experience I had fighting for Montanans. Someone came up to me after this speech and said, I respect your past experiences, but I'm more interested in the future and the ideas you have to get Congress working for Montana and how you're going to be part of the solution. That was great advice. We've run a campaign on Montana ideas. We've released plans for agriculture, for energy, for public lands, and that's what I want to see Congress do, is work on solutions to move Montana forward. It's true, Congress has about a 9% approval rating. I read somewhere that cockroaches and root canals have a higher standing than 9%. Root canals. We can do better than that. I'm a concerned father. I've got 2 young kids. I'm concerned about their future. And I want to see Congress work together again on solutions. That's why I'm running.
Ryan, you sure after this you still want this job?
Well, the 21st century can and will be an American century, but we're going to have to earn it. You know, I wear a Navy SEAL trident in my chest. There's a saying in the SEALs that you have to earn your trident every day. And in our country, we have to relearn how to earn our liberty and have an economy that we can have jobs and obtain the American dream. And it is about the American dream and families. And in Montana, we struggle. Our nation struggles. No one trusts the government. No one trusts Congress. No one trusts the administration. We have to restore trust. We have to make sure our economy is prosperous. And today's debate, I think, will highlight some different contrasts between the candidates, and I think the choice will be clear.
Mr. Lewis, any rebuttal for either one?
Well, I've, like I said, focused this campaign on the future and ideas on the future. And so far in the campaign, I've heard very little about ideas for the future from my opponent. I've heard about what he was doing in 1988. This race is not about what we were doing in 1988. I've heard that he loves America, and we all love America and Montana. And I look forward to hearing his ideas about how we're going to strengthen public lands in this country. And if you want to see Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, repealed, well, then what's your plan for ensuring the millions of Americans that don't have insurance in this country, including 179,000 Montanans? What's the plan? That's what I look forward to hearing tonight.
Ryan.
Well, let's talk about the debt. Your plan about selling used cars and abandoned buildings and cutting congressional pay is a joke. It's not even a rounding error. If we want to get serious about America and restoring America, we're going to have to address the debt. And yes, I do support the Ryan plan as a framework because I think balancing the budget in 10 years is obtainable. There's a lot I don't agree with it. I think we can do it without challenging and eliminating and cutting Medicare. I think we can do it without cutting Social Security. I think we can do it without cutting education. But I do think that we have to address the challenges and not put our head in the sand. It's been too long since we put our head in the sand. And I do think we can work together, Democrats, Republicans, independents, to carve out a better future, because everyone knows we're in trouble. So are we going to ignore the problems, or are we going to actually address them? And then I will talk about addressing the issues.
Speaking of issues, let's get right to it. Donna Kelly, you have the first question.
There's been a firestorm over Leon Panetta's book. Just came out about a day and a half ago or so, and everybody's talking about a Democratic congressman who was a former CIA director in the Obama administration, a former Secretary of Defense, and he is laying this squarely at the feet of the administration, the Obama administration, for not getting in those negotiations with Iraqi Prime Minister al-Maliki, so that we had to leave. So I'll get to that question with you, Mr. Lewis, but let's talk with your military background. How long could we stay if al-Maliki was not willing to let us stay there? Can you just camp out and stay? And who's going to pay for it?
Donna Kelly, you have the first question.
There's been a firestorm over Leon Panetta's book. Just came out about a day and a half ago or so, and everybody's talking about a Democratic congressman who was a former CIA director in the Obama administration, a former Secretary of Defense, and he is laying this squarely at the feet of the administration, the Obama administration, for not getting in those negotiations with Iraqi Prime Minister al-Maliki, so that we had to leave. So I'll get to that question with you, Mr. Lewis, but let's talk with your military background. How long could we stay if al-Maliki was not willing to let us stay there? Can you just camp out and stay? And who's going to pay for it?
Well, yeah, good question on that. I think I was reluctant to enter Iraq because my daughter's a Navy diver, my son-in-law is a Navy SEAL. There's no one more reluctant to go to war than me. But if you go to war, you make sure you go to war to win. You give the rules of engagement so our troops in harm's way can and will win. In the case of Iraq leaving, we not only left early, we left without a SOFA agreement, which is a status of forces agreement. And that should not be overlooked. That one agreement allows our soldiers, they get prosecuted if they are allegedly conducted something wrong under our judicial system. Without a status of forces agreement, one of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine could actually get prosecuted under Islamic law. Or if a pilot errors and has collateral damage, he could be prosecuted perhaps for murder rather than under our UCMJ. And also control and status and stability. You look what's happening with ISIS today. We're going to fight ISIS. And I'd rather fight ISIS in the deserts of Iraq than the streets of America, and it's already here. Ask the gal from Great Falls who had her head severed, if you could ask her, because that's ISIS.
But did we have to go? If al-Maliki said you're not staying and they didn't get through the negotiations?
There was multiple opportunities to stay. There was multiple opportunities for administration to get involved, and they chose not to. There was multiple opportunities to check ISIS at the beginning, and we chose not to. This is what happens when you lead from the rear and not from the front. Because if the United States does not lead, no one else will.
Would you have supported the administration when they said we're going to have to pull out, we don't have anything on paper that we can stay, and then it's progressed to this point where now are we playing catch up in the game, fighting ISIS with airstrikes and trying to get back territory that we already spent a lot of blood and treasure on?
Look, the safety of Americans is our number one priority, and ISIS does not share our values, and they obviously have no regard for human life. But we need to learn from the mistakes of the last 12 years of nation building in Iraq. And when I hear I'd rather fight that war in the deserts of Iraq than here at home, I think that's a simplistic way of looking at the problem. They estimate there are 1 billion Muslims in this world. They're not all in that region. 1 billion Muslims. Out of that 1 billion, they say about 15% are Islamic extremists. If it's 15%, that's 150 million Islamic extremists. The idea that we can just bomb our way out of this problem is not realistic to me.
For both of you, airstrikes now to try and gain back some of the ground that ISIS has taken, but will there have to be boots on the ground?
Look, I support doing whatever we need to do to keep our Americans safe, and the security is our number one priority. That's what I said first. But we need to be thoughtful about our approach. And number one, Congress needs to debate this issue and authorize force, fulfill their constitutional responsibility. And how much is it going to cost? What's the budget? What's the end game? And I just don't think the correct response is to instantly say we need to put troops on the ground into Iraq.
My opponent called for economic sanctions against ISIS. Now tell me how you put economic sanctions against a non-nation state. Maybe we should perhaps write a tersely worded letter. The issue is that ISIS is a danger. It's a danger to here. I think you have to have a three-pronged approach. You have to shut down our southern border. Our southern border is no longer an immigration issue. It's a security and an immigration threat. A nation that can build a Panama Canal in the 19th century certainly can build a fence in the 21st. Secondly, unfortunately, it's going to call for America to lead. And you cannot control ISIS by air alone. In the words of General Conway, four-star, former commandant of the Marine Corps, there isn't a snowball's chance in hell that air operations will work, and I agree. Secondly, you limit our ground forces to special forces, to supplying support. We make sure our coalitions that we choose are watched and efficiently trained, and limit our involvement, but make sure that ISIS is destroyed.
Quick follow-up, because no one answered how we're paying for this. We've already put 2 wars on the credit card. Would you be willing to support a war tax to support, as Donna said, a perpetual war that we seem to be in?
Look, there's 2 clearly different approaches to this situation here on this issue. And I'm saying we need to be thoughtful and responsible in decisions. No, a letter is not going to get the job done. But this is somebody who called for invading Mexico a few weeks ago because we have an American in jail in Tijuana. That's not the kind of judgment I want representing me in Congress. And his instant reaction to the president's announcement that we would have airstrikes was, let's send in more troops. He also said a couple years ago that when the president announced that women should serve in combat roles in this country, he said that is nearly certain to cost lives, women serving in combat roles. That's not the judgment we need in Congress, and it's a good question, Jay. How much is this going to cost? And it needs to be debated in Congress and authorized.
Quick rebuttal, Ryan. How do we pay for this?
We pay for it by having a strong economy. A Navy costs money. Bridges, schools, infrastructure, that all cost money. Paying for Medicare, Social Security. We need a robust economy. And John, I know you didn't serve, but Tiramisu is a Marine that has been languishing in a prison in Mexico for over 6 months. Every man, woman, and I've served both, and I've commanded both. Everybody that serves in this country makes sure that America has their back. And when America doesn't have their back, like Benghazi, like Mexico, what happens is it sends a signal to every veteran fighting, you know what, America's not going to be there. I did not advocate invading Mexico. I advocated the president doing his duty and doing by all available means to get the young Marine back.
Next question goes to Jill Valley.
All right, I'm going to start with Mr. Lewis, talking about money a little bit. You've criticized Mr. ZINKE for taking 70% of his money from out of state, outside of Montana, because it makes him captive to out-of-state interests. Well, John Tester got 80% of his money in that same vein, so is he too also captive to out-of-state interests?
The reason I've highlighted that I've taken over 70% of the money that I've raised in this race is from Montana is because it's unusual, and I'm proud of that, very proud. I've worked very hard to raise and finance this campaign from Montanans. And there's a huge difference between the way I've done it and the way my opponent has done it. He has raised most of his money from California, Texas, and Florida, 3 states. And those 3 states combined have 116 representatives in Congress. We have one representative. Look, I said from the beginning we're going to run a Montana campaign on Montana ideas and financed by Montanans, and I've worked very hard at that, including contribution from all 56 counties. So I'm very proud of that record, and comparing it to the 2012 election is comparing apples and oranges. In that election, $50 million was spent in Montana in the Senate race alone. That's disgusting to most Montanans. And so we're going to keep doing what we're doing, focusing on Montana ideas and focusing on running a Montana race financed by Montanans.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm not going to apologize for having a national stage. I'm not going to apologize for going to different states and having coalitions between different congressmen. But the facts are this. I have 18,000 donors. Most of them are small donors. That 18,000 donors compared to about 3 represents veterans and seniors that share a common idea, that America is exceptional. Do I like the fact that you have to reach out of the state? No. Max Bach has had about 90%. No one criticizes that. But the fact of the matter is, having a national platform means you can do national things. That means you can reach into coalitions and meet other congressmen, because we only have one congressman in the state of Montana. 1 out of 435, not a lot of vote. You're going to need, again, coalitions, friendships, relationships based on American exceptionalism.
Our next question goes to Janelle.
And this is for Mr. ZINKE. I'd like to address where most of our Montana voters see the two of you, and that's on television in political ads. Mr. ZINKE, in one of your ads, you repeatedly reference your milestones in life versus John Lewis's age. All of your milestones getting through your life as he's growing up. Can you help us with the message that you are trying to get across in this ad?
Yeah, more leadership, less politics. I've spent my life leading. I have an MBA, an MS in finance. I've done education. Being a naval officer is more than just leading troops into combat. It's also looking at challenging, complex problems and finding solutions that are real. I've sat down with warlords and agreed back and forth on solutions. I can certainly sit down between Democrats and Republicans, as I did in the Senate, to find real solutions.
You continually bring up his age. Do you feel that because you are older, you make a better leader? So the older someone is, the better leader they are?
No, I bring up a comparison of two lives, and it's a positive campaign. I've had a lot of experience. I've done a lot of things in my life. I've been more than a Washington staffer. I've been more than in politics. I've been a business guy. I understand the private side. I've been an educator. I understand education curriculum. I know how to lead. And most of all, I know how to solve problems, because the problems facing our country are large and daunting. But they are fixable. I mean, we created them, and we can fix them.
John Lewis, rebuttal.
Look, age is arbitrary. What you stand for and why you're running for this position is not. If you were running against Teddy Roosevelt, he'd tell him he was too young. If he was running against Ronald Reagan, he'd tell him he was too old. Look, I can't do anything about the fact that I was born in 1978. But my experience is very relevant to what we're trying to do here. I've worked on legislation in D.C., helping veterans. I've worked on issues right here in Montana. I've been to all 56 counties, helping seniors get a Social Security check. So that experience is very relevant. Age, look, I go back to what I said in the very beginning here. This election is about the future, what ideas you have for the future, not what you were doing in the 80s and 90s.
Follow up on, as long as we're talking about the congressional ads, let's talk about your ad, Ryan ZINKE. Can we just agree right now that John Lewis did not write the Affordable Care Act?
Well, he didn't write it all, but being the state director, it was his job to make sure the values and the interests were reflected in that bill. And when concerned Montana businesses called, what were they told? They were told, you know what, don't grow your business past 50. Make sure you don't employ your employees more than 30 hours. That hurts business, that hurts every family. And as a state director, that's your responsibility.
But your ad says that he wrote it. That's not what you just described, isn't it?
On a typewriter.
On a typewriter. So that's not true.
I don't think he wrote it all.
John, you have an ad campaign that says you want to cut congressional pay. Can we just agree right now no one's going to cut congressional pay? Because it's going to take an act of Congress to cut congressional pay.
Yeah.
Really, what would that accomplish?
Well, first of all, let me say something very quickly about those healthcare ads. And look, we have millions of uninsured Americans in this country. And what is the solution to insure those Americans? I'd like to... there are tens of thousands of Montanans additionally that are benefiting. There's somebody in the audience tonight, he's named Al Kesselheim. He's a part-time teacher, lost his insurance January, and he signed up on the exchange for insurance today. and he's paying half of what he paid before. There's thousands of Montanans like that. So if you want to repeal Obamacare, if you want to repeal the legislation, what are you going to tell Al and his family and his kids what he's going to do? Because he would lose that insurance.
Well, we're not cutting congressional pay. That was the question.
Congress has a 9% approval rating. They need to do their part. Will it solve our deficit issues? No. But I also said that if you can't pass a budget, you shouldn't get paid. Congress hasn't passed a budget in over 1,000 days. And so, look, this is about Congress doing their part.
Ryan, quick rebuttal.
Well, there's 20,000 Montanans that lost their insurance. 20,000. Yeah, there are. And let me further say this, is that do we need affordable health care? Absolutely. Can we do it better? Absolutely. But one size fits all from Washington isn't the solution. I understand there's some good things about Obamacare, pre-existing conditions, that's good. But we're going to see more and more people lose their insurance. What makes you think that if you couldn't afford insurance before, that all of a sudden you magically get a subsidy and you have a $9,000 deductible? What makes you think you can pay that $9,000 deductible if you can't afford insurance in the beginning? You can't. So there are a lot of ways to make sure we have affordable health care. Pooling, tort reform, look at individual health care accounts, low-cost clinics. There are a number of things that make a difference to Montana, which is an aging population.
Okay, we're going to get into
right.
Obamacare, I'm sure, later. Next question. I think we have time for one more question before we go to break. Donna, your turn.
Okay, as long as we brought up age, some of us are rapidly approaching Social Security, and others, certainly, we've done it for decades and decades, and talked about as the Holy Grail, don't touch it. But for those of us who are getting close, and yes, that's me raising my hand, the ball keeps moving down the field. You know, it's 62, then it's 65, then it's 70, and a percentage that you're going to get. Would you change it? Can we keep it? How would you make it better? And are you going to keep moving the ball? And I've lost track of who gets that first. I'm sorry.
Mr. Zinke.
Well, I think we can keep our promises. It's Social Security. I sat down with McCater's Institute and looked at the numbers. And Social Security is absolutely healthy for those that earned it. If you worked all your life and that was a promise made, that portion of Social Security can be healthy. But what's happened is you have a lot of new people, holes in the ship that are draining that fund out. And Congress has stole from it multiple times. And again, it goes back to how are we going to afford all these things? We need a robust economy. And how do you get a robust economy? You have to look at making sure government goes back in its roles so America can innovate and think out of the box again. The regulatory environment, not through Congress, but just the regulatory burden on business in 1 year, 2012, was $3.6 trillion. 1 year. When you look at that amount of overburdened regulation, doesn't involve clean air, clean water, it's just stifling innovation. And secondly, energy independence. I'm an optimist. If we focus on those two things, then we can keep the promises. We can make sure we honor our veterans, the pledges. There's a lot of expenses out there. But $18 trillion, I think 10 years to balance the budget is a reasonable amount of time. I think we can accelerate our economy to make sure we have a prosperous economy moving forward, and we can fix it. I'm positive we can.
This right here is the clock. When it gets to zero, that's 60 seconds, and that was about 1:30 on your answer.
Oh, I have one left.
John, your rebuttal.
I didn't hear an answer in that response about Social Security. 1 in 5 Montanans enjoy the benefits of Medicare and Social Security. If we do nothing today, the Social Security Trust Fund will be solvent until 2033. But we do need to do something and keep it solvent for many years after that. I support an idea that's endorsed by AARP, and that's to raise the payroll tax cap. And for people that make over $117,000, they need to continue to pay into that Social Security Trust Fund so we can keep it solvent. For those that have...
For how long?
Be more specific, Donna. How long?
You said they need to keep paying if they're making over $100,000. They need to keep paying into it for how long?
I think we should all do our part. Absolutely, do our part with the goal of making that trust fund solvent for many years beyond 2033.
Okay, we're going to drill down real quick. On the retirement age, do you support raising the retirement age? That's a way to help pay for some of this. Is that something you would look at?
Or a percentage?
Right. No, I do not at this time. Look, people work their lives for these benefits. They need the assurance that it's going to be there for them when they retire. And let's not keep moving the goalposts for retirees. I don't support that.
Ryan?
I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's necessary, and I would not support it because, again, is that the Social Security program itself, if you just look at those who have earned it, and most of Montanans have earned it over a period of their lives. And that's the way it was designed. And it's solvent if you look at that. And I think it should go back and make Social Security exactly what it was. It's for those people that have earned it over a period of time, it will be there. And we have to make sure we keep our promises. And I'm the guy that's trying to save it. I'm trying to the guy that's making sure we're financially solvent, save Medicare, save Social Security, so the check clears.
And with that, we're about halfway through our debate. We want to invite you back. We're taking a 1-minute break. You're watching the U.S. House debate statewide here in the Montana Television Network. We'll be right back.
Our live coverage of the Montana at-large House District debate continues in a moment. In the meantime, a look at some of our programming tomorrow. In Washington Journal, David Wasserman of the Cook Political Report with the latest on the 2014 House races and predictions for seat changes. Then a roundtable discussion on public opinion in politics with Republican and Democratic pollsters. We'll take your calls, and you can join the conversation at Facebook and Twitter. Washington Journal live at 7 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN. And the Centers for Disease Control will hold a briefing tomorrow to provide an update on the investigation into the first Ebola case diagnosed in the U.S. That's expected at noon, and we'll have live coverage here on C-SPAN. Now our coverage of Campaign 2014 continues with this live debate in the U.S. House at-large district race in Montana. Candidates Democrat John Lewis and Republican Ryan ZINKE. Debate is courtesy KTVQ-TV and the Montana Television Network stations.
2014, the House debate on MTN and Montana PBS.
We welcome you back here to Bozeman, where we are listening to the U.S. House debate between Republican Ryan ZINKE and Democrat John Lewis. I'm just going to throw out a quick question about personality. Since all we get to do is watch these ads with you guys, I want to give you guys an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself. What inspires you? What's perhaps your greatest accomplishment so far? Just get out of the facade a little bit. Just tell us a little bit about Ryan ZINKE.
Well, I love to fly fish. My greatest accomplishment is marrying my beautiful wife, who's here today. I love my kids and my grandkids. I'm proud of my daughter, who I told two things: don't join the Navy and don't marry a Navy SEAL, and she did both. My young sons are doing well. And, you know what I care about? I care about working families in Montana and making sure, I'm a blue-collar kid. I grew up 3 generations of master plumbers. And what matters to me is making sure our kids have the same legacy and opportunities that I had as a kid. I had a wonderful childhood, growing up in Whitefish and born in Bozeman. I want to make sure my kids and your kids had the same experience.
Maybe you'll be able to put those plumbing skills to work back in Washington if you're successful. John?
Sure. Well,
tell us a little about your personality.
Yeah, well, my family inspires me as well. If you get off the campaign trail, you go home and do the main job. I got an 8 and a 6-year-old, and we just last night coached 2 games of soccer. My wife's the head coach. I'm the assistant. And daughter's 8 years old, and soccer's getting to that serious level. Refs, serious parents. I looked over at a game a week ago, and there were people tailgating at the game. I thought, soccer's gotten serious. But look, I want them to have what I had growing up in Montana. We're all in Montana because we want to be here. It's the way of life. It's what we have in Montana. And I worry about the future with what's going on in Congress, going crisis to crisis to crisis. And so I'm a solution-oriented person, and that's what I want to do in Congress.
All right, let's get back to some of the issues now. Appreciate your candor there. Joval.
Yeah, we're going to go back to Obamacare, affordable health care. From Mr. Zinke, I got a question from a business owner in Hamilton named Paul, and he said for 25 years as a Montana business owner, he paid a lot to medical insurance over the years, really didn't get any payback. This is the first year he's had Obamacare. He says it's proven to be the first reliable health insurance of his working life, and he's worried about your campaign ad that promises to eliminate that, and he is worried what will you replace it with, and we talked about that a little bit earlier, but specifically to reassure Paul of Hamilton, is that still going to be there for him, because that's what he needs to survive and to fund his family's health care?
Well, he's one of the few, but I agree that the Obamacare does work for some. And I use the term abandon, meaning that when a ship is sinking, I think Obamacare is sinking. When a naval officer is abandoning a ship, he doesn't jump in the ocean. We make sure that you go to a safer, smaller, more stable vessel. And there's a lot of ways to make sure Montana is represented in how to do health care better. Tort reform being one of them, business pools, individual health care accounts, low-cost clinics, tax deductions. Ultimately, what we want is quality health care. We want to make sure we have access and affordability. And I think one size does not fit all. I think Montana is an aging population. We're rural. And what makes sense sometimes in Washington, D.C. or Washington doesn't make sense in Montana. And it will continue to hurt. Part of the Obamacare package hasn't even been implemented yet. Wait until we get the whole thing. And I'm concerned. There's court challenges to it. So I think the challenge to Congress is to quickly come up with a better solution, articulate it, sell it, and make sure Montana is represented.
John Lewis.
Look, when I hear abandon the ship, it's not abandon the ship, it's jump ship, because there's no plan to get people to shore. Look, we've had 50 votes in the U.S. House, over 50 votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act. To go to what? We've come back to it. Millions of uninsured. We have yet to hear a plan of what we're going to do about that, because many of those folks get health care. You can go down to emergency room at Deaconess and get the care that you need. That cost is spread around to everyone else. Higher insurance costs, higher hospital costs. And so, look, the answer is insuring more Americans, insuring those millions of Americans. Every industrialized country in this world has asked themselves the question, is health care a right? And every single one of them has answered in the affirmative except the United States. We need to continue to improve the health care system, not go backwards and jump ship when there's no plan to insure more Americans.
Well, Mr. Zinke, could you bullet point what specifically you think is not going right with the Affordable Health Care Act?
Well, one is the business side. I don't think whether it was an intended consequence or a consequence intended by design, when you penalize a business for going over 50 and growing your business over 50, when you penalize employment over 30 hours, Montana, you need 40 hours and benefits. It's hard enough to make a living in Montana. And when you have a system that penalizes over 30 hours, penalizes medical innovation, you look at what's happened. What's happened to our families? When you can't get a 40-hour job because you're penalized for it, that means you're probably going to have 2 or 3 part-time jobs. That means when you have part-time jobs, one of those jobs is going to be just for making the payments for insurance. And what happens when you have erratic hours? Who's at home when the children come home? And it's affecting working families and businesses in Montana. And can we do it better? Yes, we can, John. Should we work together to do it? Absolutely.
Look, I'll tell you what's affecting working families. It's not having insurance and higher insurance costs and the high cost of health care. That's what's affecting working families in this country. And this scare tactic that businesses are going to pay this huge price just isn't true. I just read an op-ed the other day just read an op-ed. I believe in competition in the insurance marketplace. We've got 3 companies offering insurance through the exchange: Blue Cross, Pacific Source, and the Montana Co-op, providing competition amongst each other. Companies that have over 100 employees, well, they currently may have a group plan through Blue Cross Blue Shield. Rates have been going through the roof. Here's their options: get a new group plan through one of those other companies like the co-op, or dissolve the co-op and send individuals into the insurance market where they're going to pay less for insurance and the company is going to pay less for insurance. States that don't have competition, like Wyoming, one insurance company offering insurance on the exchange has the highest insurance rates in the country. So look, businesses in the long run are going to benefit from insuring more Americans.
But are there some areas where you could tweak it? Because that's what I hear Mr. ZINKE saying, that he's saying, you know, there's some areas that maybe we could do better here. Are there a couple of places that maybe you might make some changes?
Absolutely, absolutely. Did the law fix our healthcare system? Absolutely not. Look, we need flexibility in the system, innovation. Montana, for example, we have one of the co-ops. There's 22 states that have a co-op. Let's do more of that to provide that competition. In the 22 states that have the co-op, individuals are paying 8% less on insurance rates in those 22 states. I hear from small businesses, there's too much paperwork. Let's reduce the paperwork and make it less complicated. This is a long-term problem, long-term. We're not going to solve it overnight. We need to keep doing things to make the law flexible and fix the things that aren't working.
What about, there's a woman on this panel who has a pre-existing condition. What about that? Would you do anything with that? That's one of the big parts of Obamacare that people were concerned about, to cover folks who have a pre-existing condition.
Yeah, no, I agree on pre-existing conditions, and I've toured around Montana, and there are a lot of people that had pre-existing conditions that couldn't leave the job because if they did, they couldn't get insurance on the next job. So I agree. That's a very good part. But what happens in Obamacare in a few years when 14% is a raise in home health care? This is, Montana's an aging population. What happens when Medicare payments are reduced? What happens to our urgent care facilities when we don't have the premium on Medicare? So there's a lot of issues in Montana that don't fit a model of Washington, D.C. or larger urban states. And Montana's rural. And we forget the power base of this country is on the west and east coast. And what about Montana? What about Wyoming? What about South and North Dakota? We're rural, and we have to protect our rural interests. And I think we can do it better. But there wasn't one Republican vote on Obamacare. It was done at night, and Nancy Pelosi was right. We don't know what's in it until we vote on it, and until we pass it, and that's not right. And I think we can do better. And I don't view life through a red lens or a blue lens. I view life through a red, white, and blue lens. And I think we can do it better.
So just to follow up, go ahead, John.
There were no solutions there about health care. What I heard was all the problems we have in the healthcare system. I didn't hear one idea about solving the healthcare crisis we have in this country. And look, I'm somebody that's solution-oriented and is going to be focused on that if I'm fortunate enough to serve.
Janelle, let's move on to another issue.
Okay. Let's talk energy. Mr. Lewis, are you in favor of developing 2 proposed export terminals in the state of Washington to deliver Montana and Wyoming coal overseas?
Well, it's a complicated situation, number one. And for one, look, Montanans deserve and need to have markets to send our products, our commodities, whether it's coal, whether it's ag products, whatever it is. And we have a lot of congestion on the railroads today. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is this: do we want Washington, D.C. to come in and solve this decision for us, or do we need to figure out a solution between our states? Because I don't think it's fair that one state can tell our state that we can't send our commodities through that state, no matter what the commodity is. We also have commodities coming from the West Coast that travel through Montana. What if in Montana we said that can't come through Montana anymore? So this is a complicated question. And we need a solution, and I think it needs to come from Montana and Washington State so that we can get our products abroad.
Ryan Zinke.
Well, I don't think it's complicated at all. The answer is yes, we need them. And any energy plan, John, your energy plan didn't have oil and gas. And if you don't have an energy plan that supports oil, gas, and coal in Montana, it isn't an energy plan for Montana. And you can do it better. You can spend money on research and development to make clean coal, which we should. But our gas plan in this country is enormous, and we should leverage it. You know, look at the coal trains going through Missoula. Each coal train is $300,000 of revenue to Montana. 24% of the oil production tax goes to K-12. If we want new schools in Montana, which we should have, roads, highways, infrastructure, sewer system, how are we going to do it? We have to use our energy resources wisely, which we can. We don't have to take North Dakota as a model of excellence. We can do it better in Montana, but we need to develop our resources wisely, and we need to develop them now. We can be energy independent in this country for 5 years, so let's do it.
The rail lines,
No, go ahead. Yeah.
the rail lines are already crazy busy, for lack of better terms. We're already pushing through oil and coal, and we're pushing wheat off of our rail lines.
That's right.
With these two export terminals increasing the coal heading to the West Coast, how are we going to handle it, and what are you going to tell communities?
Well, I did talk to Matt Rose, and he's the CEO of Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad. And it is an issue that we need to build pipelines. The Keystone Pipeline is one of many. But you remember my opponent in the last debate talked about trucking. We're not going to truck oil. We need to build pipelines. And whether you sit on the left or right of global warming, every day 3.5 million barrels equivalent is flared or burned in North Dakota every day. And that's wrong to waste it. So we need to build pipelines, we need to build infrastructures so we can export Montana commodities, and we need to shore up our transportation system with a railroad to make sure, you know, the sugar beet factory in Sydney has trains going out, our wheat, and all commodities that Montana has. We need to make sure we have the rail system in order to provide product.
John?
Look, number one, it's not true that oil and gas was not in my energy plan. I called for investing in all forms of energy that we have an abundance of right here in Montana. And I heard him say, whatever you say on global warming. I think that's pretty accurate of what his position is on global warming, because here's somebody that was endorsed by the Montana conservation voters when he was running for the legislature in 2008, sent a letter to President Obama calling on him to do something about climate change, and now all of a sudden is a climate change denier and says we shouldn't invest in renewable energy. And look, which is it? Let's have consistency on this issue. And I'm calling for investing in the long-term future, not just traditional coal, oil, and gas. Sure, those support thousands of jobs, a huge part of our economy. 53% of our electricity comes from coal. But let's invest in the long-term future. And I'd like to see my opponent share those positions that he once had, but today does not.
Well, as long as we're on the subject of global warming, do you believe global warming is a human-caused event?
You know, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal recently that everyone should read. It was by a former Obama administrator, Undersecretary of the Department of Energy. It has 3 points. One, is climate changing? Yes, as it always has. 2, is man an influence to that? Yes. Now, what is the influence? That's a science that's not settled. Last 16 years, there's no model that promulgates doom and gloom. In fact, the temperatures have not been rising in the last 16 years significantly. Wall Street Journal, look it up, sir. So the issue is, it's not a hoax, but it's not proven science either. But you don't dismantle America's power and energy on a maybe. It's that we need to be energy independent first. We need to do it better, which we can. But it is not a settled science, and for the president to say that Hurricane Sandy was a result of climate change is simply a false claim.
John Lewis.
Again, sign a letter to President Obama asking him to do something about climate change. A few years later, say that a volcanic explosion in the Philippines has done more to add greenhouse gases in the world than any man-made cause. And also, I read in an article a few months ago that no, it wasn't any man-caused thing. It's the rising of the ocean levels and the warming of the temperature in the climate that's causing global warming. That's what I read. He said that. Look, I want to see consistency on this issue, and above all, we need people in Congress that, regardless how you feel about it, are solution-oriented, want to be part of the solution, because the debate is not going away. And when you put your head in the sand and say it's not true, that's not helpful. Even ask coal companies. That's not helpful to the debate.
All right, we're moving along. I've got a question for both candidates. This is a question about student loans. Watched some news last night. The United States government is making billions of dollars on student loans. It's obscene. It's just unfathomable. Would you support reducing the interest rate on some of these student loans, or at least back legislation that would allow some of those student loans to be renegotiated?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I would support you being able to refinance those student loans. Student loan debt has replaced credit card debt, and auto loan debt is the highest amount of debt in young people that are starting out in the world. The average Montana starts off with $27,000 in student loan debt. We need to do something about that. We need to make college more affordable through Pell Grants, and we need to let students refinance student loan debt. An irony here is that in the Ryan budget, it cuts Pell Grants. Over half of students in the university system in Montana receive Pell Grants. It cuts Pell Grants. And I heard some criticism about my debt plan, that it's not just about selling off used cars. But look, he supports the Ryan budget, the framework of the Ryan budget, but says there's certain things in there that he doesn't like privatizing Medicare and selling off public lands. Well, that's a rounding error right there. Because if you're not in favor of that, then how does the Ryan budget work?
Ryan, your response?
It's not the Ryan ZINKE budget, but I do support a framework that balances the budget in 10 years. Back to education.
Please.
I sat on as the chairman of the Montana Senate Education Committee for a reason, because I understand the link between education and a good job. And education is an investment, it's not an expense. If the government is making money on the backs of our students that are trying to better themselves, it's wrong. And we should prosecute those for doing it. I also have the incentives, through grants. There's a lot of skills we need in America that aren't being filled. Everyone complains about jobs going overseas because there's engineers overseas. But how about training the engineers here, so we don't have to look overseas for software development and those type of skills. So if we need a demand skill in America, it's an investment for America to make those funds available for students to fill those high demand jobs. And it doesn't have to be a 4-year degree. There's welding jobs in Billings, Montana. There's welding jobs here that we need. $30 an hour, show up on time, drug-free.
Just for the record, if the United States government is making money on these student loans, Wall Street Journal, look it up, $60 billion they've made in student loans just since 2006 or 2007.
That's probably the only thing they are making money on.
Well, Donna Kelly.
And I think that welding job per hour is a little higher than that from experience with a friend of mine, so that's actually a really good job. Let's do a personality question here. If you win, who will you thank? And if you lose, who will you blame?
If I win, I'm going to thank my family, and especially my wife. My wife's been through a lot. When she was a service spouse, my daughter, myself, and my son-in-law were all deployed together. That takes an enormous amount of sacrifice. Now, if we lose, I'm going to blame John Lewis.
John?
Well, look, if we win, I'm going to thank my family. my wife, Melissa, and my kids. It's a huge sacrifice to do this. Put yourself out there, run for public office. And my wife has been there for me through thick and thin, and I can't thank her enough. And I'm going to thank the people of Montana who have funded this campaign. We mentioned it earlier. Vast majority of the money I've raised in this race is from Montanans because I believe in what we're trying to do here. If I come up short, well, that's tough. But I know we'll give it everything we've got and maybe try harder next time.
Well, with that, our hour is mostly up, but we have both of you scheduled for a 2-minute closing statement. And we did flip a coin. John Lewis, it was decided you get to go first with the closing statement. So the next 2 minutes are yours, sir.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Jay, and I want to thank you, Ryan, for doing this again, and our panelists, Janelle, Donna, and Jill. Tonight and throughout this election, you've seen a clear choice in this race and the approaches that we would take to issues in Congress. If you want a show horse in this race, then Mr. ZINKE is your guy. If you want a workhorse, then I'm your guy. I promise that if I'm fortunate enough to serve, I will spend every day working as hard as I can on Montana issues, remembering who we serve. This race comes down to who has the best vision for Montana. When it comes to public lands, we need somebody that's going to be a champion for protecting public lands and furthering access. Let's be proactive. Let's get better access. We need somebody who will be a champion for Medicare and Social Security, not support proposals that would privatize Medicare and take away benefits from seniors. And if you are a woman making a difficult health care decision, we need people in Congress who think we should let women make those decisions, not politicians. Senator ZINKE is proud of his service, and I think we all owe him a debt of gratitude for that service. But we do not owe him our vote. And I respectfully ask for your vote, and I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
All right. Ryan ZINKE, you have the next 2 minutes.
I'm an optimist. I think the problems facing our country can and will be fixed. And I do think the 21st century will be an American century, but we have to earn it. And we do have to work together. It's just not about Republicans or Democrats. It's about Americans. And I've always viewed life as being American first. Then I'm Montanan, and then I'm a Republican. I don't dislike my neighbor who's a Democrat. I try to persuade you that maybe the Republican side is better, but it's not always better. You know, my voting record in the Senate was clear. I voted on the merit of the bill and not who sponsored it. And I'll do the same in Washington, D.C. I don't yield to pressure. I yield to higher principle. And I have been wrong, as we all have. And that's part of leadership, to correct your course if you're wrong, get better facts, and learn from your mistakes. You know, our president, and you may like him or may not like him, but he is our president. And today, or yesterday, at Northwest University, in Kellogg School of Business, he made a couple remarks that are interesting. He said, well, while I'm not running for office, make no mistake, my policies are on the ballot. Every one of them. And what that means is this election is about whether you think the policies of Barack Hussein Obama are correct. It is. I don't believe they are correct. And I'll stand on a better vision, and I'll stand on a better legacy given to my children of freedom, of liberty, and making sure we earn it. So a vote for my opponent is a vote for the policies of this president. And if you agree with them, so a vote for my opponent is a vote for the policies of this president. And if you agree with them, great. If you don't, I'm going to ask for your vote. Thank you. God bless America. And God bless all those who defend her. Good night.
Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you for all here in the audience and your attention tonight. Also, for those of you watching on Montana PBS, we invite you to stay tuned. In the next half hour, we'll be joining our panel along with political science professor David Parker from MSU as we analyze this debate. And so that's going to come up on Montana PBS immediately following. But for right now, we want to thank you for joining us here on the Montana Television Network. Don't forget, those absentee ballots will be arriving in a mailbox soon near you starting Monday. So now it's up to the voters to decide. And I hope you enjoyed our debate tonight. Also, just a quick reminder, our PBS special will also be replayed tomorrow morning on Face the State, on the Montana Television Network, that airs at 9:30 in the morning. Until then, we'd like to thank our panel. I'd like to thank John Lewis and Ryan Zinke and your